Fastworks started off at General Electric, and it was a private opportunity, but then they made it public. And we call it now the Framework for Leadership Development for the 21st Century and Beyond. It's a technique that clarifies the vision, the mission, it identifies goals and metrics. It helps you to think about developing that integrative STEM culture. It's about combining everything that we've done here this week and bringing it together. And we know, and that's the whole premise of this, is that when we work in isolation, we do not get as far as when we work together. And the whole goal of this summit is that there is no one individual or organization that has all the answers, but collectively we do. So we've heard a lot of these words. We've taken everything from artificial intelligence, STEAM, STREAM, CTE. We throw all of those things together there. But what needs to come out of it is we need to look at what's our vision, what's our mission, what's our goals, and how do we create that action plan. So there's 3 principles. This was discussed when we had ITEA here with Kelli Dooley. And what was really interesting was when this work started, and we had the major STEM associations we all pulled together. The NEA hosted us down at their headquarters in Washington, D.C., and we had a conversation, and we actually came up with 6 principles around what would integrative STEM look like. And the first one was, we took those 6 principles and we realized there was already something that was published there, but it only said the word STEM. So we took that, met back with all these other alphabet soups, CTE and all these other organizations, and we said, you know what, we just need to change one word on all of those principles. And we added the word around integration. So the first principle being, and this is what we've been saying all along, is that you have to respect each discipline. There's certain things you need to know in math and certain things you need to know in science and writing and everything else. But the second one is the one that we've always spent several years on, is finding those authentic connections. Making sure that students are looking at the work from an entire lens of saying, how does this connect to reading, to writing? I use an example with parents, a volcano. I'm like, you take that volcano, it's gonna explode, it's exciting, kids love it. But the thing is that shouldn't only sit in science. There's math, there's measurement, you could have algebraic concepts that could come out of that. You can read about it, you can write about it, there's social studies, what's the history of it. You can make art, a volcano. So there's so many ways that you can drive that across all of the content areas to get students really excited and engaged. And this year, we spent a lot of time focusing on this third one, but also weaving in what is the role of AI as we talk about all of this. So again, CTE programs, exposing kids to careers, skills, 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 skills. I can't emphasize that enough. When I'm talking to major corporations out there, they're no longer hiring you for a specific job per se. They're hiring you based on the skills because I can train you in the various content areas. So, and this just got a little bit funky here because I was PowerPoint and I put it into Google, so I apologize for any of the little loops that are there. But this is our framework. So you start off with, what is your problem statement? What are you trying to solve for? So how do you implement whatever you're going to implement with fidelity? How am I going to integrate AI with fidelity? How am I going to integrate integrative STEM with fidelity? That's our first step of it. The next one is, what are our learnings? What's the key learnings that we've identified? Now, how do I create buy-in around that? And again, this becomes a real evidence-based piece of it. So you want to make sure whatever you're taking away, if you're taking away AI, how do you create buy-in with the rest of your community? What's going to be the valuable solution? How do we validate our work? How do we make sure that what we're thinking in terms of, hey, I'm gonna form an AI committee, I know exactly what I'm gonna do, but how do we know that's the right thing? How do you make, again, sometimes we call those assumptions that we make, but how do we validate? What's that evidence? What's in our back pocket to say this is why we need to do this? Because we need to get like-minded individuals around, and we need to get individuals that maybe aren't buying in, right? So we have to think about, so I'm just using that as an example. Learning metrics. To me, this is the #1 thing that I think is so incredibly important, because oftentimes we jump in the boat, we start doing something, but we don't spend time to say, what are those milestones along the way to make sure that we're seeing growth and we're having outcomes. So those learning metrics are key and they're essential, and you can have them every 2 weeks, once a month, every day, whatever you want, but you have to be able to say the next one. Do I pivot or persevere? Because so oftentimes we say, no, we said we're gonna do this, we're gonna stick with it, we're not gonna change course, and guess what? Maybe you should. And sometimes it might be a tweak, and sometimes it might be just continuation and go. So there's 5 principles for successful implementation. 1, starting off with what are the current gifts? What assets can you leverage? What are the current gifts in your school? What do you have going on? Where are those strengths, right? So start with that always. The second one is extreme focus. You need to say, you know what? I'm not gonna spend 30 years saying if this is gonna work, yes or no. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm willing to fail fast, I'm willing to say no, I'm willing to accept imperfect answers, and I'm willing to test and do fewer things to get a larger and a greater outcome. And then things, what you must do. You gotta keep your eye on the goal. You know what's so hard in education? Every single day you're out there, you're doing your work, all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I wake up this morning, I got my to-do list, here's my top 10 things I'm gonna cover, and then guess what? Something happens with a student, something happens with a parent, something happens with a teacher, school happens. And that's the part that we have to say, with all those distractions that are around us, we still need to make sure we're keeping our eye on our goals. So, other things, 10 times better. Don't do something small. It's like either go big or go home. You want to do something that's going to make a big change. I know there's a lot of incremental steps there, but if you're not thinking big and bold, then why are we making those slight changes? Those can all happen as part of that process, but think, go big and go bold. And then the final one is around rational risk. There is always risk in anything you're going to do. The goal is to minimize it, but also to make sure understanding what that risk could be. My mom used to always say to me, what's the worst case scenario? And I was like, well, so you think about those things, right? You know, I could get sick, I could get hurt, I could fall down. What's the worst case scenario? And then how do you minimize that? How do you make sure that's not going to happen, right? So what are your protections there? The other thing is, we talked about Albert Einstein, so I thought I would throw this in here. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem, 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And what we are all so good at doing is someone comes up to you and says, I have a problem, I have a concern, I have an issue. And we jump right away. We have an answer right away. It doesn't even take us 2 seconds. We know it. But instead, we should really digest and really think about what is the problem. Let's think about it. Let's process it. And then let's engage in what that solution would be. So here's some of the questions that I want everyone to think about. As you go in, whether it's today, whether it's when you're back in your schools, but take away, what were the key takeaways for you? Not you as a group, just for yourself first. And then mirror that and have a conversation with your colleagues that were with you. What were their key takeaways? Let's have a conversation around this. What are you going to implement? Now, we can't implement everything all at once, so we have to also prioritize. And how are you going to go back and say, I had a great experience, I was fed well, I slept well, all of this, I had great speakers, I met great people. But how are you going to share that and make sure your enthusiasm is contagious to someone's like, well, I didn't get to go. Well, I didn't have that opportunity. So that's going to be really, really key, is how do you communicate? Creating that elevator speech on when you go back to share what your experience was about. And then think about it. What are those current bright spots happening within your organization? How do you leverage and make that connection? We do this really well. We have a really, really great robotics program in our school. And I went to this summit, And I want to talk about the role of AI in this. I learned about this app developer. Hey, maybe that's something we could do, right? So you're picking up on that positive side of what's already happening and making sure that we're drawing the connections for those other individuals, which is really important there. What are the challenges? You have to address this. You have to know what your obstacles are going to be as you go into this. How are you going to ensure it's executed well? How are you going to make sure that everyone is, we're going to do this, we're going to stick to our guns. Again, we're going to measure along the way. And is there going to be any resource issues? That's time, it's money. You don't want to wear people out. Oh, I have another initiative. Oh, I have something else to do. How do you embed it? How do you make sure that it's just a part of the daily? You're not saying, nope, we've got to create an all new curriculum. Oh, we've got to do all of this. We're going to weave it together to make sure that it happens. And then the most important part, measure your progress. How are you going to document that? And that's something that oftentimes we forget about. So again, when you're looking at kind of your priorities there, where you want to be is high priority, high impact area, right? We don't want to look at everything that we've done. We've talked about AI, we've talked about CTE, we've talked about transdisciplinary, we talked about social emotional learning. We have all of these concepts. Every presentation we had something different that we were taking away there. But we need to now prioritize what those things are, because you cannot possibly do everything all at once. So now, create that prioritization. If we're already doing the transdisciplinary, well, maybe I don't have the CTE. How do I weave that in? How do I weave in the AI into my current programming that I'm doing? So again, looking at that high priority, high impact area is essential. So this is your challenge now, is to create an action plan. And as I said, all of this is going to be on the drive. I'm going to make sure that we have it on the app too. But this is just a sample action plan. You can create and design this any way that you want. But again, the number one thing is what's your priority area? So as you're kind of brainstorming, say, well, I took away that we really need to build an app. We need to look at AI more. We need to make sure we're embedding it. Maybe it was the CTE part of it. Maybe it was that, we're not even on the wavelength of thinking about STEM being integrated across all of the content areas. I might have science and math talking, but I don't have reading, writing, art, social studies, and every other one. Find out, put them down, and prioritize. What's my first task? What's my second task? What's my third task? You don't want to boil the ocean. Then you want to make sure you write a really strong overview and description and make sure it has evidence behind it. Why are you doing this? Well, we're going to have an AI committee. That's great, but why? Why? So make sure you're answering that. Look at what your vision and mission is. Now, I know we didn't spend time on that because just from time constraints today, but really going back and look at what the vision and mission is of your organization. Is it current? Did it change during COVID? And I've had conversations with schools that said, oh, well, here's our vision and mission, and then you look inside the school, nobody knows what the vision and the mission is, and nobody understands what it is, and the community doesn't understand. This is something that if your organization has a vision and a mission statement there, everybody you work with, everyone you touch should know the vision and mission. Everyone should be on the same page with it. And the other part that's really important is staying current. So sometimes a vision and mission could be done 10, 15, 20 years ago. Well, what's happened? There's been an evolution of technology, of the world around us. So it's always important to go back and make sure it's current. The next part is, what are your goals? How are you going to accomplish these goals? So again, setting that out. But then looking at what's your strategy, describe what you're going to do, who's the team? Now, I don't want to hear that, oh, it's going to be my science team, or it's my math team, or it's going to be my communications team. Instead, you want names, because that holds accountability. I want to see, oh, Allison, this was assigned to you. Where's the progress on this? Amber, this was assigned to you. Where's the progress on this? So you can, again, hold accountability and make sure you see movement there. The timing of it, is it going to be every 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Is it a month? There has to be a deadline and accountability. What are your benchmarks, your checks along the way? How are you going to monitor things? What are additional resources that you need? And in that particular section too, it might be, you know what? I really want to follow up and use that MIT app. So maybe I need to contact STEM Happens Network. They can put me in touch with them, those sorts of things, right? So again, looking at who else can be part of it. It's not just about the financial resources, but it's also about, I made a great connection with the Challenger Center, so I really want to continue to utilize those activities. Again, that could be a resource too. And then how are you going to define success? What does that look like? What's your end goal there? And then finally, and how are you going to follow up? So again, this is just some things just to kind of pose out there. And so whether you do it now or whether this is something that you take home, these are resources that we have for you. And we're also going to make sure too, one of the things that has been really valuable with organizations that we've worked with is that we have an assessment tool. And I'll make sure everyone here has that as well. But basically what it looks at is what are the current activities that you have going on. So if I was to pick a school, it might say, well, we have a robotics club, we have coding, here's our math curriculum, here's our science curriculum, here's our ELA. You might have all of these things. But are all kids accessing it? Or is the robotics an after-school club? Is the coding an after-school club? And what this tool will do is start to help you to identify, here's all the great strengths of what we have, but it also will help you identify, wow, we need to work on the following things. These are our gaps there. So again, we're gonna share all of that. So we're around if there's any questions whatsoever, but you know, as I know people are departing and all of that, I really wanna thank you. These sessions have been recorded, which is great. But the participants here, you have some special access to special things. And so we're gonna make sure that you receive all of that. We will be doing a series of webinars also throughout the year. But if there's something here that you wanna present on and you wanna perform a webinar for it, or you wanna be part of the summit next year, you know, please let us know. And if anybody wants to be part of that planning committee, you know, again, it can't just be any one person. You know, this is about bringing great minds together, and we could use your help. And so again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can set up committees. I promise I'm not gonna make you work every single day, but you know, we can have these conversations there. But there's just a lot of opportunities. So again, I just wanna thank all of you, and safe travels to wherever you go. And we're here for you throughout the year, so don't ever feel like it was just the summit, that's the end. No, you're gonna still hear from us, but anything you need, just let us know, okay? All right, well, thank you, everyone.